Tonight, the shock death of Pope Francis. The 88-year-old suffered a stroke and a heart attack on Easter Monday, just hours after he was seen in public. We look at his legacy, his impact on the Catholic Church and the world, and what now for the Church. In our Friday forum, I speak to the head of the School of Theology at Australian Catholic University, Joel Hodge, about Pope Francis, a man who had to juggle deep divisions in the Vatican and the world. Also, Anzac Day is being commemorated across the country with dawn services, marches and reflection. But that didn't stop neo-Nazis trying to ruin everyone's mood in Melbourne. And a new poll shows the coalition's drop in support continues 1 week out from Election Day. All that and more tonight on Firstline.
This is Firstline with Daniel Pizarro.
Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of Firstline. Pope Francis's funeral will be held tomorrow following his death on Easter Monday. The Pontiff was elected as head of the Catholic Church in 2013 following the shock resignation of his predecessor, Pope Benedict. The Pope had been battling ill health for several months, including double pneumonia just weeks ago. But despite appearing frail, the 88-year-old continued public duties, including going through the crowds at the Vatican on Easter Sunday and meeting the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Hours later, he was dead due to a stroke and a heart attack. Here is the official announcement made, which stunned the world.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, con profondo dolore devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco. Alle ore 7:35 di questa mattina, il Vescovo di Roma Francesco è tornato alla casa del Padre. La sua vita tutta intera è stata dedicata al servizio del Signore e della sua Chiesa. Ci ha insegnato a vivere i valori del Vangelo con fedeltà, coraggio e amore universale, in modo particolare a favore dei più poveri ed emarginati. Con immensa gratitudine per il suo esempio di vero discepolo del Signore Gesù, raccomandiamo l'anima del Papa Francesco all'infinito amore misericordioso di Dio uno e trino.
Here, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described Pope Francis as a moderniser.
His was a papacy of firsts, the first pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first to take the name of that great champion of the poor, St. Francis of Assisi. Pope Francis' compassion embraced all humanity, and today he will be mourned by Catholics and non-Catholics alike. He urged us to remember all we hold in common, and he asked the world to hear the cry of the earth, our common home. He invited world leaders to join him and, to quote him, emerge from the dark night of wars and environmental devastation in order to turn our common future into the dawn of a new and radiant day.
Earlier this week, I spoke to Associate Professor Joel Hodge, National Head of the School of Theology at the Australian Catholic University, for his insight into the impact of Pope Francis on the Catholic Church and the world during his 12 years as the Pontifex, as well as what direction the Vatican could turn once a new Pope has been elected. Professor Hodge, thank you so much for joining me here on Firstline after quite a remarkable couple of days. I want to start by saying that even though Pope Francis, of course, he had been battling ill health and he had been in hospital with double pneumonia for several weeks, his death still came as a tremendous shock to almost everyone, if you would agree with me on that. And I think the reason for that is that we only saw him just hours earlier on Easter Sunday, going through the crowds, picking up little children, like engaging with everyone, meeting with the Vice President of the United States, and then just to find out just hours later on Easter Monday, the early hours of Easter Monday, that he had gone. I mean, how are you feeling when you heard the news?
Oh, it was very sad. It was a surprise. As you say, it looked like the Pope had pulled out of the worst when he was in the hospital, and it seemed as if he was back with us, even though still very frail, very fragile, still recovering. But he'd made some public appearances, and so we're hoping that he might be around for a while longer. But clearly, he was on his last legs, and he tried to get out amongst the people for a final time, and um, was there till, working in a sense till the end, which is a beautiful thing, and a sign of his dedication to office. He was known as a great worker, someone who was always there at the coalface, loved engaging with people, and he was doing that right to the end up till Easter Sunday. But it was sad. It was definitely a sad moment when hearing the news, and um, but then I think for me the sadness turned to gratitude, gratitude for his life and all that he did, all that he gave, the kind of person he was, the witness he gave to Christianity, to the life and love of Jesus, the way in which he led the church. So all of that I think was a great gift, and now he's enjoying his reward for all his service.
I think one thing that I'd like to imagine was he knew his time was coming, but he practically willed himself to get through Easter, to get through Good Friday, Easter Saturday, Easter Sunday, and then Easter Monday. It was finally his time, and I think that's something that I personally believe that's what might have been going through his head, just to have that last one moment with the people of the world before passing away, because we'd been worried about his health for so long, and given his appearance after coming out of hospital, naturally everyone was thinking, how long really does he have after such a long life, but also going through so many health battles. I mean, I was preparing for the worst when he was on the ventilator a couple of weeks ago, because that harked back to when Pope John Paul II went on the ventilator in 2005, and he said, "No, my time has come. I want to go peacefully now." And I was worried that we were coming up to that period right now, but I think in many ways, the fact that he went on Easter Monday, in many ways, is a very poetic and very symbolic effort for everything that he's done since he became Pope. What's your take?
Certainly, I think it is very um, resonant that he died uh, around Easter, within the Easter octave, according to the Catholic liturgical calendar. So that 8 days of celebration around Easter. And Easter Monday is regarded as another Easter Sunday. So his death came at the time when the church was celebrating its most important feast, and the mysteries that are at the heart, the beliefs and ideas and happenings and events that are at the heart of Christianity, Jesus' death and resurrection. And for the Pope to have died around that time is very special, I think, in a way that it connects to Jesus's own journey. And Pope Francis is now in his own death going through that journey. He's been through that journey in a sacramental sense in baptism. In baptism you enter into the death and resurrection of Jesus, and now he does that through his own death and into now eternal life with God. So it's beautifully resonant, I think, that it occurred around this time, although of course still a sad loss, but very appropriate. And John Paul II as well, same I think, Easter octave period that he died as well. So there is something special about it. Whether Pope Francis was able to push himself through, or he had a lot of help. Obviously, he almost died on a couple occasions. It seems as if a bit of dose of grace was there helping him along the way, as well as many people, the doctors, nurses, his own personal nurse. He got some good advice at times. Go to the hospital. He wasn't always keen to go to the hospital, so he was helped along the way very much to be able to stay alive that long.
I want to ask you, and this is a question that I know we could spend hours upon hours about, but what do you think is his legacy? Looking at how he started all the way back in 2013, following the shock resignation of Pope Benedict, this is a man who went in his own direction, and I think one of the best things about him was he was so inclusive to everyone in the world, the planet, the environment, and he also had to navigate some of the toughest political issues, ranging from Israel and the Palestinians, the war in Ukraine, the poverty that we're and famine in South Sudan, dealing with people like Donald Trump. This is not just a religious role. This was also a political role as well, and he had to navigate such turmoil and difficult times. But at the same time, he was also someone who was embraced by non-Catholics, people of other religious persuasions, and atheists and agnostics as well. This was someone who could bring people together.
I think there was something that just really resonated with people about Pope Francis. He provided this simple, clear witness to what Christianity is about, to what Jesus is about. I think he just lived it out in a simple but really authentic way, in the way in which he made efforts to lead a simple life, not live in the apostolic palace, not go around in fancy cars. The choice of his name, Francis, again, that commitment to simplicity, humility, poverty, his outreach to the poor, his inclusiveness, as you said. I think he lived out Christianity with a simple joy and authenticity. Joy was very much part of his vocabulary when talking about what it means to be Christians. Christians shouldn't be, looking gloomy and sad and unhappy, about being Christian, but actually they should be happy and joyous. It's great news that that God in Jesus has died and risen for us out of love for us and wants us to live with him for eternity. Well, Pope Francis just thought that was such a joyous message, and of course, that's a great and important strand of Christianity that he's picked up on. So I think that simplicity of faith and witness to that faith was his major contribution and legacy, and it impacted on a whole range of different areas. In most importantly, perhaps, on the way in which he conducted the papacy itself, the way in which he was Pope. He downplayed the regal, royal elements of the papacy. Each of the popes since the Second Vatican Council, since the 1960s, have been playing down the royal elements of the papacy. They haven't gone about through the coronation and all this kind of thing that you can do when you become Pope. But Pope Francis has really tried to downplay that aspect of the papacy, its notoriety, its fame, its lavishness in a sense, and tried to just make it a simple office, an important one, of course, leading the church, bringing people together, giving witness, giving teaching, but trying to do that in that kind of simple way as he did, living with other people, going around and inviting people who were homeless into the Vatican, going and washing the feet of prisoners on Holy Thursday. These kinds of important gestures. He wanted to be around people, but particularly people on the margins, and outreach to them. And all of that was a outworking of his simple, authentic, faith in Jesus and love for God and love for other people. And I think that that's really important, and it's really transformed that office of the papacy and challenged in a good way the rest of the church to think about how is it living out its Christian faith? Is it doing it in that simple, humble way of accompanying people, being with people, not being over against or above people, not judging people, but loving them and accompanying them. I mean, that's always been part of Christianity, but Pope Francis really emphasized that, brought it out. And so having that pastoral approach was very much part of his ministry and his approach to the papacy, and he tried to imbue that amongst bishops, amongst priests, and amongst the ordinary layperson.
We know, of course, that he has been an incredible man. I'm interested to know about some of the more difficult things that has to be discussed about Pope Francis. And one aspect, of course, was he did cop some criticism for suggesting Ukraine might surrender to Russia to save many lives. He got a lot of flack from his idea from that. There was also, of course, a sad moment when he had muttered a gay slur a couple of years ago. And there was also this, in many ways, some frustration from more progressive and liberal Catholics that while he was giving some leeway to call for better acceptance of gay, lesbian, trans people, he was also still in many ways very conservative. I know he's been described as a moral conservative. So in many ways, some people have been a bit frustrated with how his tenure as Pope has been. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think Pope Francis himself said he was not a perfect man. He made mistakes, and he tried to admit to those mistakes when he made them. And you could see that throughout his life. He had periods of real crisis where he had to look deeply inside himself and look at his actions, and where God was in all of that and where God was leading him. So he had some real challenging times in his life, and he talked about the importance of mercy for him, and that was one of his key concepts um, that he felt the merciful love of God in amongst all the imperfections and mistakes he himself had made. He tried his best. He obviously was a really good leader in many ways, but he said he was not always right, and he relied on that mercy of God to get him through, particularly the difficult times. So I think that's the first thing to say about Pope Francis. He was just really down to earth in that sense, and everyone can, I think, relate to that. We all make mistakes. We're not perfect, and we need forgiveness and all that kind of thing. Um, I think too that with regards to being a more inclusive church. He made some very important gestures in this regard. Very early on, that statement about gay and lesbian people, who am I to judge? Trying to shift the tone of the debate away from ideas or ideals and teachings and so on to uh, human to human. Um, who am I alongside of you? Not above you, not telling you what to do, but with you and accompanying you. And I think he tried to do the same thing with divorced and remarried Catholics, trying to give them a path of accompaniment. So, and coming out of his Jesuit tradition, being a Jesuit, his spirituality, that path of being accompanied by God and accompanying other people with them in their relationship with God is a really important part of Ignatian spirituality, of Jesuit spirituality. And so he tried to bring that approach to his papacy, and then allowing God to then do the work to transform people's lives in whatever way God and that person was working. It wasn't up to him to transform them. It was up to God and the person to be working together. So I think he tried to shift things to that kind of tone. Now, he did get criticisms from both sides, you could say. Some people saying, oh, you're not holding to teaching, you're not holding to the truth. People need true teaching to be able to guide them. And other people were saying, you're not being inclusive enough, you're not, in, changing the teaching to include gay and lesbian people or divorced or remarried people.
Stuck in between a
So
rock and a hard place in many ways.
exactly, yeah. So he was, and in many debates, you find yourself here. He found himself in that zone, so to speak. So I think with the church, it's always a path of incremental change, or oftentimes anyway, and rather than quick change, which can sometimes be good, but sometimes it can have unintended consequences, particularly when you're dealing with a global institution that spans across almost every country in the world, over 1 billion people, many different viewpoints. You have to be able to hold all that together as Pope and journey with all of that, be able to bring people together, and enable their viewpoints to be respected and help them along the journey, not alienate people too much. So I think Pope Francis was very aware of that. It's a difficult, difficult job. But what he tried to do, particularly towards the latter part of his papacy, was to institute a process to help the church with these kinds of issues in debating, discussing, discerning them together. And he called that process synodality. So he tried to bring not only bishops together to talk about really important issues who govern the church, the bishops who govern, but actually too lay people, lay men and women, religious brothers and sisters as well, clergy, priests, get everyone together talking, discerning important things and priorities together within a spiritual environment. He provided a spiritual framework. It wasn't just a parliamentary debate, it was a spiritual conversation. And he did that with the whole church, and then he brought people together, a representative group in Rome most recently, and that process concluded last year. And I think that process really set an example for the church about how it could come together and discern spiritually really important things. It's not a complete process. It wasn't perfect. There are criticisms of it. There still needs to be developments, but at least it opened up a space to help discern and discuss some of those really important issues.
We have, of course, Pope Francis's funeral Saturday, Rome time, and he has requested that he not be buried in the Vatican. He's actually going to be buried outside, and that's into one of his favorite basilicas. What kind of funeral could we expect? Because we've, as you also mentioned, the recent toning down of all that over the top regal royal pomposity in many ways. Judging from Pope Francis, he would really want a celebration of his life, but also something that's not extravagant as well.
Exactly. I think he has, in his instructions around his funeral, tried to make it simple, and I think it will reflect the ordinary funeral mass of the church, Requiem Mass. It will have some special prayers and elements, but it'll fundamentally reflect that structure of anyone who can have a funeral mass, any Catholic. So there'll be some really beautiful moments, I think, where we're praying for Pope Francis's soul and his movement into eternity and celebrating that with hope. So I think that is really the distinctiveness of a Catholic funeral. And I think it will be, as you say, a simple affair. It'll be reverent, it'll be solemn, but it will be a testament, I think, to the way in which Pope Francis conducted his own life and ministry. And he'll be buried, as you mentioned, not in St. Peter's, but in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, where he had a great devotion. He had a great devotion to that church and that basilica, particularly because it was under the name and patronage of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and he had a great devotion to Mary. He sought her help and protection, particularly when he traveled, and he'd come back to that church, pray there and give thanks. He'd often visit that church regularly. So he had a particular devotion to that church even before becoming Pope. And so I think it's quite fitting that he is buried there. There are a few other popes there, but there hasn't been one since the 17th century buried in that basilica. So I think Pope Francis will be in good company there, but just a simple, I think, place of rest in a sense. It'll have his name and that's it, but an appropriate one because he really loved that place and he loved Mary and was very dedicated to her.
Now we have, of course, the big discussion, the conclave, the election of the next pontifex. And funnily enough, of course, if you go on Twitter, as you might imagine, there's people going, oh, this guy is definitely going to be the next pope. Well, we should have this guy because he's traditional, or we need this guy because he emanates the same values as Pope Francis. And it's funny how almost every country that has a potential front runner says, oh no, we've got the right person. Well, no, we've got the main candidate here. So what is going to happen now with this conclave?
Well, once the funeral is finished and the 9 days of mourning, we'll have the cardinals gathering together. So they're already starting to gather in Rome, the cardinal electors. So there are 138 of them who are of age. You can't be over 80 to be able to vote at least. And these cardinals are representatives of the global church chosen by the popes, primarily by Pope Francis, Pope Benedict before him, and they will come together and pray, discuss, get to know each other, talk about priorities, talk about key issues, and they will decide by a 2/3 majority who the next pope will be. Usually it comes out of the group of cardinals, but it doesn't have to be within that group. They can vote for people outside of that group. And one of the interesting things about this conclave is that Pope Francis has really globalized the representation of the cardinal electors. So there are cardinals that are coming from many different countries that have never had cardinals before. So that will introduce a new element to this election. The cardinals will have to get to know each other. Many of them might not know each other very well. So there'll be a lot of getting to know each other and getting to trust each other and talking about shared interests and common vision and praying together and all that kind of thing. So that's an exciting moment for the church. The church, of course, is a global institution, is growing, particularly in Africa and Asia, in our own region. So it gives a chance for a lot of those countries that were underrepresented before now to have a stronger representation. Traditionally, Europe was the most strongly represented because that's where the Catholic Church was traditionally strongest, but now it's clearly grown beyond the European Church. So that'll be really interesting to see how that goes and what dynamic that leads to with this election. And I think there'll be still the same kinds of things that cardinals will look for as they have in the past, but there'll be many more different people in the mix, which will introduce a new element.
And this, of course, brings in the big question of where is the direction the Catholic Church is going? That is one of the biggest aspects, because we've known that given the world has changed, societal attitudes have changed, the world has changed so much. The question, of course, is what is the place of Catholicism, Christianity, religiousness in society, in the world, how people see religion, how Catholics view what their religion is about, because as you've mentioned, we have so many different perspectives, ideas and call-outs. This is probably going to be that moment where the church will have to agree, where do we need to go? What is the guiding path? Who is going to be the representative for the church, for Catholics, for the world, for many people as well? That is going to be the crucial factor as well.
It'll be a very important moment because we've got various trends that are within the church at the moment, particularly post the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, that are that have been playing out since that time, and various social and cultural trends, demographic trends, the global nature and growth of the church. So it'll be very interesting. I think some of the important touch points will be how to engage in mission, how to present the vision of the church to the world. That has taken a decidedly open and engaging tone since the Second Vatican Council, and Pope Francis really exemplified that in his approach, that real open engagement to the world and witness to Christianity in a certain type of way, an invitation, not an imposition or anything like that. So I think that'll be a really important aspect. How does the church conduct its mission and give a vision for mission to the world, in terms of evangelization, service, care for the poor, the environment, all that kind of thing. So that'll be one really important area. How to continue on Pope Francis's pastoral vision for the church and synodal processes around governance and greater inclusion of laymen and women within the governance of the church. How will that continue? In what form? Will that be combined with perhaps a stronger theological or teaching approach, like we saw with Benedict XVI or John Paul II? Will we get a leader who is charismatic and engaging, or someone who's a bit more reserved and intellectual, a good administrator? Different leadership styles will be at play here as well. So the cardinals will look to see, how does this person lead? What kind of spirituality do they have? What kind of person is this? Is he a wise person? Is he a competent person? Is he able to relate well and manage people? There'll be all those really basic fundamental questions too that you need to take account of when you're looking at a pope. And of course, what do they believe? What kind of approach will they take to theology and to church teaching and those kinds of areas? So I think there'll be some of the really important hot button issues, and then of course there'll be questions around how the next pope can manage the different moral issues, and different political issues, the political state of the world with the United States under Donald Trump, the war in Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, the relationship with China, which has been very challenging, and a whole range of other areas. The growth of the church in Africa and Asia, how is that managed? Of course, the ongoing implications of the sexual abuse crisis, which is really very important. Financial issues and reforms, administrative reforms, these kinds of things. There'll be all these issues at play.
Professor Joel Hodge, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Thank you.
To other news now, and millions of Australians, New Zealanders and Turkish people have been commemorating Anzac Day by attending services and marches from here all the way to Gallipoli, as we utter those immortal words, lest we forget. One of the most famous dawn services is of course at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. Here is some of this year's service.
all of the families who sent their young sons and daughters off to war. Just like my own sons, they had their whole lives ahead of them, but many of them would not return. If dark days should come again, I am confident that their generation and those who follow will do what is required. May the stories of every sailor, soldier and aviator who has served our nation at war, in competition and in crisis be remembered. And may the spirit of those more than 103,000 Australians on the wall of remembrance behind me, who made the ultimate sacrifice, be with us always. Lest we forget.
Unfortunately, a group of neo-Nazis tried to disrupt the Melbourne Dawn Service as they booed the Welcome to Country ceremony, which was being conducted by Mark Brown. But the jeering was drowned out by the crowd gathered.
I'm here to welcome everybody to my father's country. Beautiful Bunurong country. But before we do that, we pay our acknowledgements and we pay our respects. We pay our respects to all of my ancestors. We pay our respects to all of my elders. And we pay respects to all of my community members. Past, present, and emerging.
What we saw was obviously terrible and it is deplorable. But in a sense, I don't want to give that any more airtime than it deserves.
One of the neo-Nazis was arrested by police. He was previously convicted of performing a Nazi salute. Turning to the federal election, and there's now just 1 week left until polling day, though 1.7 million people have already casted their ballots in pre-polling since it opened last Tuesday. Opinion polls continue to slide for the coalition. This week's YouGov poll suggests Labor have now hit their highest level of support in the two-party preferred vote during their term. On primary votes, the government is at 33.5%, up 0.5%, while the Liberals and Nationals have dropped a further 2% to 31%. The Greens are up slightly to 14%, up 1%, while One Nation has recorded a jump of 3.5% to 10.5%. On the two-party preferred result, Labor is now at 53.5% to the Coalition's 47.5%. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is also well in front as preferred Prime Minister, 15 points ahead of Peter Dutton, including here in regional Australia. It comes as Mr Dutton's controversial plan to axe 41,000 public service jobs is back in the limelight, with the opposition leader confirming all APS jobs which would go would happen in Canberra, meaning almost 2/3 of the public service jobs in the ACT would go, except for frontline and national security positions over 5 years. But that admission has been seized by the federal government, with Finance Minister Katie Gallagher, who is based in the ACT, saying over 2/3 of the APS are frontline staff, national security, Centrelink and Medicare, meaning the cuts would have to come from elsewhere. The Canberra business sector has also warned such massive cuts would wreck the territory's economy. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has defended Labor's candidate running in Peter Dutton's very marginal seat of Dickson. Ali Francis shared an altered image of Mr Dutton wearing a Nazi uniform on Twitter in March 2017. The opposition leader said Mr Albanese is trashing his own credibility, who described Ms Francis as an extraordinary person, though admitting he believes many Australians regret what they post on social media. Ms Francis has said, "I should have chosen my words more carefully." And that's the program for now. I'm Daniel Pizarro. Enjoy your Anzac Day long weekend, and I'll see you next Friday as we mark the last day of this federal election campaign. Good night.